Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. This daily show goes year by year through all 250 years of our American history. If you are new here, welcome aboard, and if you are returning, welcome back. Now let's get into the episode. This year brings two transformative changes to American government: the inauguration of the nation's first president and the proposal of a National Declaration of Rights. As the United States under the new Constitution finds its footing and begins to define its character, there is much to explore, so let's go. Welcome to 1789 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America, and the country is just over a month away from its first national presidential election. Washington writes to Henry Knox, saying, "From different channels of information, it seems probable to me that Mr. John Adams would be chosen vice president. He will doubtless make a very good one." We start this year out remembering one of the 56 brave men who signed the Declaration 12 and a half years ago. Thomas Nelson Jr. was born on December 26th of 1738 in Yorktown, Virginia, and known as Junior as his uncle and grandfather's names are also Thomas. He received his primary education from the Reverend Yates of Gloucester County before going to England for additional schooling in 1753. He attended Eton and then entered Christ College at Cambridge, graduating in 61. He returned home to the family mercantile business at the age of 23, and while still sailing back, was elected to Virginia's House of Burgesses. Nelson married Lucy Grimes in 62, and together they have 13 children. In 74, the House of Burgesses was dissolved by Lord Dunmore because of its resolutions censoring and condemning the closing of the port of Boston. And to protest this closing, Nelson begins spending some of his personal fortune sending needed supplies to Boston. Local histories claim he arranged the Yorktown Tea Party and personally threw 2 half chests of tea into the river, but I've been unable to find confirmation of this from any primary sources. Nelson was appointed colonel in the 2nd Virginia Infantry Regiment in July of 75 and elected to the House of Delegates in 76. Nelson presented a resolution that our delegates in Congress be enjoined in the strongest and most positive manner to exert their ability in procuring an immediate, clear, and full Declaration of Independency, and the motion was adopted. During the siege and Battle of Yorktown, Nelson led the Virginia militia, whom he had personally organized and supplied with his own funds. Nelson's personal fortune was ruined by the Revolutionary War, and he was never compensated. He dies on January 4th from illness and is buried near his son's home. Nelson's friend, Dr. Smith, leaves this account of his death. From his unexampled patriotic exertions during the late war, he had exhausted a fortune and at the time I mention saw his property arrested, and a prospect of sinking from affluence, almost to absolute poverty. My friend, you can easily conceive the poignant distress of a man in this situation, with an amiable wife and a dozen children around him. He could not bear it. I attended him in his last illness and saw that the exquisite tortures of the mind were the disease that destroyed his body. The inscription on his grave says, "General Thomas Nelson, Jr., patriot soldier, Christian gentleman, mover of the resolution of May 15, 1776 in the Virginia Convention instructing her delegates in Congress to move the body to declare the colonies free and independent states. Signer of the Declaration of Independence, War Governor of Virginia, Commander of Virginia's forces, he gave all for liberty." Back to our story, Congress has set January 7th as the date by which states are required to choose electors. 10 states have secured their electors, though New York is in a deadlock, and ultimately the state legislators failed to appoint electors by the deadline. Meanwhile, in Maryland, John Carroll, the Bishop of Baltimore, has secured the deed to an acre of land atop a hill overlooking the village of Georgetown, and has begun planning for a new Catholic college. On the 23rd of January, Carroll finalizes the purchase of the property on which Dahlgren Quadrangle will later be built and secures the future of the first Catholic college in the United States. February 4th is Election Day, and state-selected electors cast their votes. It will take 2 months for the votes to be gathered and counted. 1 month later, on March 4th at Federal Hall in New York City, the first United States Congress meets, formally beginning the new government in America after the ratification of the Constitution last summer. On April 1st, the United States House of Representatives attains its first quorum and elects Frederick Muhlenberg of Pennsylvania as its first Speaker of the House. 5 days later, the Senate attains its first quorum and elects Senator John Langdon as its first president pro tempore. The first joint session of Congress is held on that same day, and the counting of electoral votes is their priority. Of the 74 electors allotted to the states, only 69 actually cast votes. You'll remember each elector is to cast 2 votes, and George Washington receives unanimous support, receiving a vote from each elector, and is declared president-elect. John Adams receives 34 votes and is declared vice president-elect. The next highest number of votes received by an individual being John Jay with 9, Robert Harrison and John Rutledge with 6 each, and John Hancock with 4. The only anti-federalist for which any votes are cast, George Clinton of New York, receives 3 votes. To this day, Washington is the only president to have been unanimously elected by the Electoral College, and it's unlikely such unanimity will ever occur again. On April 13th, Adams departs his native Braintree for New York after receiving word of the official count, and the next day, Washington receives official confirmation from Congress that he has been elected as the first president of the United States. 2 days after receiving the official notification, Washington leaves his home on the Potomac for New York. While unsurprised at the outcome, Washington approaches his inauguration with dread. He writes to Henry Knox that he feels like a culprit who is going to the place of his execution. Accompanied by Charles Thompson, his official escort, and Colonel David Humphreys, his aide, he travels through Alexandria, Baltimore, Wilmington, Philadelphia, Trenton, Princeton, New Brunswick, and Bridgeton on his way to New York City. At these and other places along his route, his journey turns into a procession. The artillery roars a salute of honor, and the citizens cheer as officials present him with marks of affection and honor. On April 21st, John Adams is sworn in and takes office as Vice President of the United States, beginning to preside over the sessions of the United States Senate. He addresses the Senate and expresses a warmness and gratitude for being selected, and says he is proud to be among the defenders of liberties. After his address, the Senate immediately begins discussion on matters of proper conduct, such as how the President and Vice President shall be addressed, and the Vice President's responsibilities to the Senate. 2 days later, on April 23rd, Washington crosses the bay from Bridgeton to New York City in an ornate barge built especially for the occasion. Lacking precedents to guide them in their preparations for the first presidential election, Congress appoints a joint committee to consider the time, place, and manner in which to administer to the president the oath of office required by the Constitution. Congress is, for now, meeting in New York City's former City Hall, rechristened as Federal Hall, which is in the process of being renovated under the direction of Pierre L'Enfant. On April 25th, Congress adopts the committee's recommendation that the inaugural ceremonies be held the following Thursday, April 30th, and that the oath of office be administered to the President in the Representatives' Chamber. However, the final report of the committee revises this plan with a recommendation that the oath be administered on the balcony adjoining the Senate chamber, to the end that the oath of office may be administered to the President in the most public manner, and that the greatest number of people of the United States, and without any distinction, may witness the solemnity. It's now Inauguration Day, and the city is crowded with townspeople and visitors. The square is described as so dense that it seemed as if one might literally walk on the heads of people. Around 12:30 p.m., Washington rides alone in the state coach from his quarters in Franklin Square to Federal Hall. Troops of the city, members of Congress appointed to escort the president, and heads of executive departments of the government under the Confederation precede the president's coach, while ministers of foreign countries and the local citizenry tails it. Meanwhile, at Federal Hall, Vice President John Adams, the Senate, and the House of Representatives await the soon-to-be president's arrival. After being received by Congress, Washington steps from the Senate chamber onto the balcony, where he is followed by the senators and representatives. Before the massive crowd of spectators, Washington places his left hand on the Bible and Robert Livingston administers the oath of office prescribed by the Constitution. I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Washington repeats the oath and kisses the Bible being held for him by the Chancellor, who calls out, "Long live George Washington, President of the United States," immediately followed by the firing of 13 cannons. Except for taking this oath, the law requires no further inaugural ceremonies, but after waving to the cheering crowd and re-entering the Senate chamber, the new president read the address that we'll play here. It takes just over 8 minutes to listen to.
Fellow citizens of the Senate and of the House of Representatives, among the vicissitudes incident to life, no event could have filled me with greater anxieties than that of which the notification was transmitted by your order and received on the 14th day of the present month. On the one hand, I was summoned by my country, whose voice I can never hear, but with veneration and with love, from a retreat which I had chosen with the fondest predilection, and, in my flattering hopes, with an immutable decision, as the asylum of my declining years, a retreat which was rendered every day more necessary, as well as more dear to me, by the addition of habit to inclination, and of frequent interruptions in my health to the gradual waste committed on it by time. On the other hand, the magnitude and difficulty of the trust to which the voice of my country called me, being sufficient to awaken in the wisest and most experienced of her citizens a distrustful scrutiny into his qualifications, could not but overwhelm with despondence one who, inheriting inferior endowments from nature and unpractised in the duties of civil administration, ought to be peculiarly conscious of his own deficiencies. In this conflict of emotions, all I dare aver is that it has been my faithful study to collect my duty from a just appreciation of every circumstance by which it might be affected. All I dare hope is that if, in executing this task, I have been too much swayed by a grateful remembrance of former instances, or by an affectionate sensibility to this transcendent proof of the confidence of my fellow citizens, and have thence too little consulted my incapacity as well as disinclination for the weighty and untried cares before me, my error will be palliated by the motives which mislead me, and its consequences be judged by my country with some share of the partiality in which they originated. Such being the impressions under which I have, in obedience to the public summons, repaired to the present station, it would be peculiarly improper to admit in this first official act my fervent supplications to that Almighty Being who rules over the universe, who presides in the councils of nations, and whose providential aids can supply every human defect, that his benediction may consecrate to the liberties and happiness of the people of the United States a government instituted by themselves for these essential purposes, and may enable every instrument employed in its administration to execute with success the functions allotted to his charge. In tendering this homage to the great author of every public and private good, I assure myself that it expresses your sentiments not less than my own, nor those of my fellow citizens at large less than either. No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than those of the United States. Every step by which they have advanced to the character of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some token of providential agency, and in the important revolution just accomplished in the system of their united government, the tranquil deliberations and voluntary consent of so many distinct communities, from which the event has resulted, cannot be compared with the means by which most governments have been established without some return of pious gratitude, along with a humble anticipation of the future blessings which the past seemed to presage. These reflections, arising out of the present crisis, have forced themselves too strongly on my mind to be suppressed. You will join with me, I trust, in thinking that there are none under the influence of which the proceedings of a new and free government can more auspiciously commence. By the article establishing this executive department, it is made the duty of the President to recommend to your consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. The circumstances under which I now meet you will acquit me from entering into that subject further than to refer to the great constitutional charter under which you are assembled, and which, in defining your powers, designates the objects to which your attention is to be given. It will be more consistent with those circumstances, and far more congenial with the feelings which actuate me, to substitute, in place of a recommendation of particular measures, the tribute that is due to the talents, the rectitude, and the patriotism which adorn the characters selected to devise and adopt them. In these honorable qualifications I behold the surest pledges, that as on one side no local prejudices or attachments, no separate views nor party animosities, will misdirect the comprehensive and equal eye which ought to watch over this great assemblage of communities and interests, so on another, that the foundation of our national policy will be laid in the pure and immutable principles of private morality, and the preeminence of free government be exemplified by all the attributes which can win the affections of its citizens and command the respect of the world. I dwell on this prospect with every satisfaction which an ardent love for my country can inspire, since there is no truth more thoroughly established than that there exists in the economy and course of nature an indissoluble union between virtue and happiness, between duty and advantage, between the genuine maxims of an honest and magnanimous policy and the solid rewards of public prosperity and felicity, since we ought to be no less persuaded that the propitious smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right which heaven itself has ordained. And since the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the republican model of government are justly considered, perhaps, as deeply, as finally staked on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people, besides the ordinary objects submitted to your care, it will remain with your judgment to decide how far an exercise of the occasional power delegated by the 5th article of the Constitution is rendered expedient at the present juncture by the nature of objections which have been urged against the system, or by the degree of inquietude which has given birth to them. Instead of undertaking particular recommendations on this subject, in which I could be guided by no lights derived from official opportunities, I shall again give way to my entire confidence in your discernment and pursuit of the public good. For I assure myself that whilst you carefully avoid every alteration which might endanger the benefits of a united and effective government, or which ought to await the future lessons of experience, a reverence for the characteristic rights of freemen and a regard for the public harmony will sufficiently influence your deliberations on the question how far the former can be impregnably fortified, or the latter be safely and advantageously promoted. To the foregoing observations I have one to add, which will be most properly addressed to the House of Representatives. It concerns myself, and will therefore be as brief as possible. When I was first honored with a call into the service of my country, then on the eve of an arduous struggle for its liberties, the light in which I contemplated my duty required that I should renounce every pecuniary compensation. From this resolution I have in no instance departed, and being still under the impressions which produced it, I must decline as inapplicable to myself any share in the personal emoluments which may be indispensably included in a permanent provision for the executive department, and must accordingly pray that the pecuniary estimates for the station in which I am placed may during my continuance in it be limited to such actual expenditures as the public good may be thought to require. Having thus imparted to you my sentiments as they have been awakened by the occasion which brings us together, I shall take my present leave, but not without resorting once more to the benign parent of the human race in humble supplication that, since he has been pleased to favor the American people with opportunities for deliberating in perfect tranquillity, and dispositions for deciding with unparalleled unanimity on a form of government for the security of their union and the advancement of their happiness, so his divine blessing may be equally conspicuous in the enlarged views, the temperate consultations, and the wise measures on which the success of this government must depend.
Next, Washington and the members of Congress proceed to St. Paul's Church for a service. Finally, a fireworks display in the evening ends the official program, and after a solitary dinner, Washington returns to Franklin House, the first presidential residence. America officially has a president, and Washington is aware he'll be carving out the path for future presidents to look to, and he does so thoughtfully. He writes, "Many things which appear of little importance in themselves and at the beginning may have great and durable consequences from their having been established at the commencement of a new general government. It will be much easier to commence the administration upon a well-adjusted system built on tenable grounds than to correct errors or alter inconveniences after they shall have been confirmed by habit." On May 4th of 1789, James Madison announces in the House his intention to propose amendments to the Constitution in response to the anti-federalist criticisms and state ratification convention's demands. He begins drafting amendments based on proposals from various state conventions and his own study of various rights declarations such as the English Bill of Rights and the Magna Carta. His clearest influence is the Virginia Declaration of Rights from '76, though it also draws on older rights declarations. On May 19th, Representative Elias Boudinot proposes establishing the executive departments of the Treasury, War, and Foreign Affairs, to which James Madison proposes that the secretaries of these departments be removable by the President alone. The House will debate this issue for over a month, focusing in particular on whether the President holds the power under the Constitution to remove government officers absent legislation specifically authorizing him to do so. In the end, Congress passes bills for each department that remove any explicit mention of removal authority, but provide that a lower-level department official will take custody of the department's records whenever the department head shall be removed from office by the President of the United States or in any other case of vacancy. On June 8th, Madison formally introduces his proposed amendments in the House, outlining 20 amendments covering individual liberties like freedom of speech, religion, and the press, as well as protections against abuses of federal power. The House debates whether to prioritize these amendments, but Madison insists. He feels that quick action is the best way to build trust in the new government and silence the Constitution's critics. He says, "If all power is subject to abuse, that then it is possible the abuse of the powers of the general government may be guarded against in a more secure manner than is now done, while no one advantage arising from the exercise of that power shall be damaged or endangered by it." Charles Thompson, after serving as Secretary of the Continental Congress and Confederation Congress for 15 years, resigns his position on July 23rd. The next day, he transfers custody of the Great Seal of the United States, which he has safeguarded since its adoption in '82, to President Washington, symbolizing the transition from the government under the Articles of Confederation to this new constitutional era. Throughout the summer and into September, Congress and President Washington undertake a series of foundational actions to establish the United States administrative and judicial framework. On July 4th, the United States Congress passes its first substantive legislation, the Tariff Act. It subjects most imported goods to a 5% duty and lists a number of specific duties on particular items, regardless of their value. For example, wines carry a specific tax of 10 cents a gallon. This early tariff policy is not meant exclusively as a revenue-generating measure. Its first section declares that it is necessary for the support of government, for the discharge of the debts of the United States, and the encouragement and protection of manufacturers. Many of the imported goods that are assigned specific rates have been selected because they are produced within the United States, and the rates are set somewhat higher than the 5% ad valorem tax in order to encourage the people of the United States to buy from domestic producers. As a mechanism of enforcement, the Collection Act establishes the U.S. Customs Service and regulates the collection of duties on imported goods as well as the tonnage of ships. It also designates ports of entry and defines the responsibilities of customs officials. On July 27th, the first U.S. federal government agency under the new Constitution, the Department of Foreign Affairs, is established. On August 7th, Congress passes an act establishing the United States Department of War. This agency is created to oversee national defense, including the management of military forces and fortifications. The department's formation addresses the immediate need for a structured approach to national security, as the young nation faces potential threats both domestically and abroad. Henry Knox, a well-trusted and longtime friend of Washington, is soon appointed as the first Secretary of War. On September 2nd, the United States Department of the Treasury is established by an act of Congress, and is tasked with managing the nation's finances, marking a pivotal step in stabilizing the economy after nearly 15 years of chaos. Alexander Hamilton is soon appointed as the first Secretary of the Treasury and assumes responsibility for shaping fiscal policy. Just 11 days later, on September 13th, the Treasury secures the first loan to the U.S. government from New York City banks. On September 15th, the Department of Foreign Affairs is officially renamed the Department of State, reflecting its expanded role in managing both foreign and domestic affairs. The postal system also sees a formal organization. On September 22nd, Congress passes an act requiring the first Postmaster General to report to the President through the Secretary of the Treasury, establishing a chain of accountability. Samuel Osgood is set to become the first Postmaster General. Judicial foundations are laid on September 24th with the passage of the Judiciary Act, establishing a federal judiciary with a 6-member Supreme Court and a marshal service to enforce federal law. On the same day, President Washington nominates John Jay as the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, a nomination confirmed by the Senate. On September 25th, Congress proposes 12 of Madison's amendments to the Constitution for ratification by the states. The first article deals with how representatives will be apportioned based on population, and the second states, "No law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened." Looking ahead a little, the original first proposed amendment is never adopted, and the original second will only be ratified 2 centuries from now. So Articles 3 through 12 become Articles 1 through 10. We'll hear these proposed amendments read now.
1. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. 2. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. 3. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house, without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war but in a manner to be prescribed by law. 4. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects, against unreasonable searches and seizures, shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. 5. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property, without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. 6. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial, by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. 7. In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by a jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. 8. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. 9. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. 10. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the States, are reserved to the States respectively or to the people.
On September 26th, President Washington appoints Thomas Jefferson as the first Secretary of State, a decision again formalized by Senate confirmation, and on the same day Edmund Randolph is appointed the first U.S. Attorney General, tasked with representing the government in legal matters. On the 29th, the U.S. Department of War establishes the nation's first regular army, comprising several hundred men. A modest force, but intentionally so, to ease the mind of those distrustful of a standing army in peacetime. On October 2nd, George Washington transmits the proposed constitutional amendments to the states for ratification, and the next day proclaims the first National Thanksgiving Day will be observed on November 26th. The same day, he sits for his presidential portrait. John Rummage becomes the first artist to paint a president of the United States from a live sitting and has an interesting past. Rummage was in Boston when the Revolutionary War broke out, and he enlisted in a unit formed by Irish loyalists to fight the Patriots and General Washington's Continental Army. After the war, he decided to stay in America and became firmly established in New York's small artistic community, eventually gaining a reputation as the best artist in the city, and thus an obvious choice for Washington's first presidential portrait. You can check out this portrait on our X today at 250 Years of USA. Now, motivated by a desire to connect directly with citizens, promote national unity, and demonstrate the stability of the new federal government, Washington plans a tour of New England. On October 15th, he departs New York City. The journey begins with a small entourage, including his secretaries, Tobias Lear and David Humphreys. And the trip is planned to avoid Rhode Island, which has not ratified the Constitution, as Washington wishes to engage only with the states fully committed to the Union. Washington is greeted with enthusiastic receptions, including parades, speeches, and artillery salutes in towns like New Haven, Hartford, Boston, Salem, and Portsmouth. This first presidential tour will last until November 13th, when he returns to New York City, having traveled some 600 miles. On November 6th, Pope Pius VI appoints John Carroll as the first Roman Catholic bishop in the United States. On the 9th, an address is published from the Pennsylvania Society promoting the abolition of slavery and the relief of free Negroes unlawfully held in bondage. It says, amongst other things, "Slavery is such an atrocious debasement of human nature that its very extirpation, if not performed with solicitous care, may sometimes open a source of serious evils. The unhappy man who has long been treated as a brute animal too frequently sinks beneath the common standard of the human species. The galling chains that bind his body do also fetter his intellectual facilities and impair the social affections of his heart. Accustomed to move like a mere machine by the will of a master, reflection is suspended. He has not the power of choice, and reason and conscience have but little influence over his conduct. Because he is chiefly governed by the passion of fear, he is poor and friendless, perhaps worn out by extreme labor, age, and disease. Under such circumstances, freedom may often prove a misfortune to himself and prejudicial to society." The address concludes, "Signed, by the order of the Society, Benjamin Franklin, President, Philadelphia, 9th of November, 1789. 4 days later, Benjamin Franklin pens one of his many now famous lines in a letter to Jean-Baptiste Leroy: "In this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes." On the 20th, New Jersey ratifies the United States Bill of Rights and is the first state to do so. The very next day, North Carolina finally ratifies the United States Constitution, becoming the 12th state to do so, Rhode Island now being the final holdout. Near the end of November, with the revolution in France gaining momentum, Thomas Jefferson returns to America after 4 years of living in Paris. He brings a novelty with him, a macaroni machine, likely amongst the first in America. On November 26th, Thanksgiving Day is observed nationally in the United States as recommended by President George Washington and approved by Congress. On December 11th, the University of North Carolina, the oldest public university in the United States, is founded, and that about does it for 1789, a milestone year for our country. Washington is leading with a commitment to establishing a stable and innovative federal government. The first federal Congress diligently is crafting foundational legislation and refining governmental operations, and these amendments proposed by Madison aim to safeguard individual liberties. Make sure you join us tomorrow in 1790 as we say goodbye to one of the founding fathers. We head out west for expansion and conflict, and we detail the United States' first census. If possible, on the platform you are using, give this show a like or subscribe to it. I am just a nobody, had no following before this, and I have really appreciated everybody giving the follows, the subscribes. It's been helping out a lot to get the word out there. And on that note, please share the show with somebody that you know. The very best thing you can do to help me get the word out in time for our 250th anniversary is tell somebody that may be interested in history to give the show a listen. That's it for today. This has been our story, 250 years of the United States of America. And as always, thanks for listening.